Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I guess whenever you guys decide to watch this, this is once again another lecture by your awesome professor, Weston Jameson. This is for International Relations 2303, International Politics, the introduction to it. Today we're going to be looking at realism. In order to look at realism, we're first going to start off talking about, of all things, zombies. Okay, now you will find the accompanying reading for this. We're looking at Drezner's International Relations and Zombies book, at least the second chapter of it. Okay, so the question we're going to ask in this first part of the lecture is, in a zombie outbreak, how would states respond? Another question is, how would you respond to a zombie outbreak? Would you try to shelter in place? Would you leave your house? Do you have the food? Do you have the supplies necessary? Well, when scientists look at this, and of course we look at this most scientifically, we go to the place where zombies exist. We look at movies. We look to see how movies kind of led the path, showed us the path for this, okay? So if we look through the timeline of movies, we have, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead. My favorite one in '02 was 28 Days Later. Of course, that was more of a virus flick, less a zombie flick. But the most important thing here is, obviously, you have to stay alive. You have to care about number one, okay? And number one being yourself, okay? And in order to survive, you're going to need weaponry. Now, in an international relations aspect, we might think of weaponry as military power. But you can see from this, a cricket bat is not going to be as strong as a shotgun, and a shotgun isn't going to be as strong as a Gatling gun, okay? So you need things. You need food. You need water. Some communication is good, knowing where you're going to go. The one thing you may not need is friends. Friends may slow you down. And in a classical realist sense, we have to think that we are on our own, and there is a threat in every corner, okay? So, as we get away from the movie aspect, let's ask ourselves, how would the U.S. government respond? Well, this was actually done. There was a minor study, more of a practice run exercise done by the DoD/CDC to figure out how would we respond in terms of a zombie apocalypse. I highly suggest you guys go and take a look at that link. Very interesting stuff. But the common thread is you survive. You have to survive. You have to attend to yourself first and make sure that you have enough food and water. You have a fight or flight response. Most often, you have to fight off zombies. It's kill or be zombie. And lastly, know that you are completely on your own. Okay, so if we look at the foundations of realism, we need to understand that it's a modern theory only starting between the inter-years of World War I and World War II. Now, there was two camps. We're going to talk about both of them, idealism and realism, okay? And we have to understand that after a war such as big as World War I, people thought that there may not, that might be the war to end all wars. So how do we handle this, right? Well, one camp, the idealist camp, they took their approach that if we came together and everybody understood that we're in this together and we formed strong international laws, morality, we had strong morality, we had strong organizations, rather than focusing on military power, perhaps we could stop future wars. In other words, when the League of Nations was formed after World War I, which combined the Allies all together to work together to try to make Europe a better place, they thought they could save wars from the future. Now, realism is an approach to explain international relations mainly in terms of states' power. Now, I emphasize power because this is all of it. They say that states must maximize their power or face destruction from a stronger power. They believe that World War I was just the beginning. It wasn't the war to end all wars, okay? Now, E.H. Carr was the one that termed realism, okay? He came up with the theory. And he said that it was the correct theory. It was the dominant theory across the world until the 1990s, particularly in the U.S., okay? And he would actually end up being proven correct that it was the correct theory because we actually ended up going into a Second World War about a few years later after World War One. Okay, so some of the founders of realism we have, these guys often fought against idealism. They thought that you had to protect yourself. Thucydides said the world is a dangerous and violent place. Okay, Machiavelli, he said it's far better to be feared than to be loved. Keep in mind, idealism was it was an idea brought by our own government. Okay, my man Thomas Hobbes said that the condition of man is a condition of war against everyone, okay? One more quote from my boy Tom Hobbes. He also said that we live in a state of nature in which it is a war of every man against every man, that life is nasty, brutish, and short. Do we believe that? Since we're living in this life that's nasty and brutish and short, we have to think about the assumptions that realists thought, okay? So their first one is that humans are all potentially bad, okay? We're all inherently selfish and we're all power-seeking, right? There's not a single human out there that is ambivalent, right? We are all trying to survive, okay? And as such, there is no Leviathan. Now, Leviathan just means large power or leader of the international community, okay? That means that we live in anarchy, okay? A political system that has no central authority, okay? There is no leader. Now, this does not mean chaos, but it also means that there are no rules to separate people when there becomes a conflict, okay? The second assumption is that we believe in states, right? That we believe that these nation states are individual and they act on their own accord, okay? We believe that they're legitimate, rational, and are the actors that we look at when we talk about international relations. Two key concerns: survival. The survival of the state must go on. Perhaps bigger is this idea of self-help. There is no one to help you. You cannot actually rely on allies to get the job done. You have to be able to be powerful enough to protect yourself. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, is the idea of power. Now, test question easily all three of these assumptions, but power being the main one, because you have to understand this is the ability to get others to do what you want them to do. Now, typically, we do this in terms of military or economics, right? Having the biggest economy, having the biggest military. We tend to focus on the capabilities of our strengths, all right? Modern realists emphasize balance of power, okay? And this balance of power means that one might be weaker, one might be stronger, and if it stays that way, everything remains stable. If it changes, that's when we start to see conflicts, okay? Power is based on tangible and intangible resources, okay? That could mean, tangible means tanks and guns. Intangible means the size of your economy, your buying power. Now keep in mind, this is all relative and not absolute, meaning that we can only look to one country and compare it to the other country. We cannot say that America is all powerful, well, because we could have several countries join up against us. We are all powerful relative to individual countries. The attributes of power: military strength, we're talking guns, weapons; wealth, your GDP, typically measure that in GDP. Political stability is, how often do we have regular elections? Natural resources. Without the ability to feed your troops, you cannot go to war. Alliances. Now, you can't rely on other countries completely, but friends do help friends, especially if they're weaker than you and need your help. International reputation, we sometimes call this soft power. The fact that we're able to manipulate other countries by just using our diplomatic efforts. So the question is, why should the U.S. fear any one nation? So recently there's been some issues with North Korea, but if you look, we spend more than everybody else when it comes to defense spending. North Korea spends a fraction of this. Their next closest ally, China, only spends a third as much as we do. Now, if China and Russia even joined together, that would still only be about half as much as we do. I mean, we have at least, I don't know, looks like we double up everybody when it comes to aircraft carriers across the world. We certainly have the strongest military in the world, so should we fear anybody? We've made ourselves like this because we are a realist nation. Now, as social scientists, we look at many different types of realism. In this class, we're going to focus on particularly 3 types of realism, mostly because they seem to fit nicely and there's a nice evolution of the term. Okay, first we're going to look at classical realism, and that's based on literally just danger posed by other humans. We can think tribalism or even go back to like caveman times, right? Next, we're going to look at realism, okay? And then after that, we're going to look at neoclassical realism. Classical realism, states should be protective of the national interests, right? Survival, right? The only reason why you do anything as a state is for reasons of the state, or as the French call it, raison d'etat. Keep in mind, Machiavelli, who wrote the book Prince, he says that the leader must be ready to do whatever is necessary, and not solely what is quote-unquote good. That means that sometimes we may have to play dirty, but if it means we survive, then we survive. These states often have a deep suspicion and trust issues against other leaders and other nations. Next, we evolved into what we call neorealism. Now, classical realism was a bit simple for political scientists. So what they did was they added 2 more variables. Of course, there's the variable of anarchy, again, not chaos, just no rules, and then we added distribution of power, and this became huge because what we got out of this was balance of power theory, power transition theory, and hegemonic stability theory, all of which we'll be talking about at the end of this video. And also keep in mind, none of this matters whether you're an autocracy or democracy, it all applies to the same thing, okay? Neorealism, again, tended to focus on relative gains, okay? Now, this means that what you really care about, not necessarily about who's the most powerful, but how is the state right next to you compared to you? If the state next to you is less powerful, then that means that you're in control. But if all of a sudden they gain power, then you have to worry about your own safety. This causes the security dilemma. Now, we often think about this in terms of arms races, right? Again, like we said last week, you build a missile, I build 2 missiles. If you build 2 missiles, I can build 4 missiles, right? So what does all this mean? It essentially means that cooperation is very difficult to achieve, okay? Lastly, we have neoclassical realism. Now, what they did is they combined both classical realism and neorealism and basically smashed them together, okay? So we take the assumptions of neorealism along with the power aspect of classical realism, okay? We believe that nations act defensively, right? Based on the resources that each state has acquired. Right, essentially based on the resources that each state has acquired, right? So this may lead to imbalances due to perception, right? We might think one state is stronger than they actually are, and that way we overbalance them. And then we might think that one state is weaker than they actually are, and then Alright, so in conclusion, the realists look at the individual as a power-seeking, selfish, and antagonistic individual, okay? We're all in it for ourselves, and we are all in it to survive. And we only really care about number 1, which is ourself. The realist view of the state, unitary, okay? It is a single actor. You don't have many friends, and the ones that you do have, you can't really rely on that strongly. The view of the international system, anarchic. There are no rules. There is no great leader, so you can pretty much make your own rules, right? Conflict constantly. And the only reason why there's conflict is to maintain the balance of power. When one country gets too strong, you have to knock it down. This is best happening under hegemony, when one power is very, very strong. We call this hegemonic stability theory. More on that here in a second, okay? Realism has some strengths. It is clearly stated there's a small number of variables, really only two. There's power and the distribution of power and anarchy, right? So, problems. Okay, so there seems to be a lot of rules and morals in international politics. None of that realism actually explains. It's hard to explain some behavior from a realist perspective. Like, for instance, why did we decolonize? Why did the USSR give up the Cold War? Also, there's this unclear role for economics. Like, what does trade have to do with realism? How did economic cooperation and globalism fit into it, right? So, okay, so here are your prompts for the week, right? I want you to choose one of the following. Remember, it's a one-page, double-spaced, MLA-consistent paper, just like I've been getting from you guys. Last week's papers were incredible, okay? So the first prompt is, why should the U.S. fear any one nation? We are the strongest. We are the toughest. Why should we? Or should we not? I would love to hear your opinion. Second prompt, and if you choose to do this one, it would be awesome. If a zombie outbreak were to occur, how do you think the international community would react? Would we come together? Would we fence each other off? Okay? Remember, please get these to me by September 15th by midnight. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And let's get to one more clip. Hey guys, so I'm trying to get better at the whole video editing thing. I'm working on it. Let me know what you think. Please either email me, leave it in the comments, whatever. I hope this is working for you guys. Please don't stop with the emails too. There are 3 more theories I wanted to talk about that I didn't include in the PowerPoints that actually will be on the PowerPoints that you guys have in Moodle, right? The first one is balance of power theory, all right? So this idea is that every country in the international system has some power, right? Now, what maintains peace or what maintains war is the power differences between each of these countries, right? If you're a very strong power and you're right next to a very weak power, you can dominate them, right? But if they start to grow, then you're going to start feeling a little bit diminished. And you're either going to do one of two things. You're either going to try to fight them, or you're going to try to build up your own power to keep above them, okay? Now, the other one I have to talk to you guys about is called power transition theory, right? So this is the idea that as a great power begins to shrink, there's a vacuum, there's a void, and that somebody's going to try and fill this. Now, we saw this in World War I, actually, when the Ottoman Empire fell, and when Austria-Hungary fell. Who decided to fill that void, to fill that gap? That was a rising Germany, okay? And when Germany rose, they begin to scare everybody else, causing a security dilemma, much like we talked about in the slides, right? And when they start building up towards war, then conflict erupts, right? And then the last theory I want to talk to you guys about is hegemonic stability theory, okay? It's this idea that the hegemon, if we can remember what the hegemon is from our readings, it's this idea the hegemon is the strongest bully on the block. He's the biggest, most powerful military. He's able to keep everybody in check by holding everybody down, right? Or keeping everybody from rising up. Now, hegemonic stability theory is this theory that if there is one hegemon, one single hegemon, he should be able to keep the world at least at peace. And we've sort of seen this, right, over the past, 50, 70 years since World War II, when the United States has been the hegemon. We've been able to maintain sort of peace. I mean, there was the Cold War, but it remained cold, right? So, anyways, please email me if you guys have any questions about any of this. I cannot wait to hear from you guys. I will see you guys next week. Have a lovely week. Good luck with your classes.